obviously the country wrestles with. One thing that I'm absolutely convinced of is that there is a moral and ethical element to this issue. And so I think anybody who tries to deny the moral difficulties and gravity of the abortion issue, I think is not paying attention. So that'd be point number one. But point number two, I am pro-choice. I believe in Roe versus Wade, and I come to that conclusion not because I'm pro-abortion, but because ultimately I don't think women make these decisions casually. I think they wrestle with these things in profound ways, in consultation with their pastors or their spouses or their doctors and their family members. And so for me, the goal right now should be, and this is where I think we can find common ground, and by the way, I've now inserted this into the Democratic Party platform, is how do we reduce the number of abortions? Because the fact is that although we've had a president who's opposed to abortion over the last 8 years, abortions have not gone down. And that, I think, is something that we have to ask ourselves.
Have you ever voted to limit or reduce abortions?
Well, I am in favor, for example, of limits on late-term abortions, if there is an exception for the mother's health. Now, from the perspective of those who are pro-life, I think they would consider that inadequate. And I respect their views. I mean, one of the things that I've always said is that on this particular issue, if you believe that life begins at conception, then, and you are consistent in that belief, then I can't argue with you on that, because that is a core issue of faith for you. What I can do is say, are there ways that we can work together to reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies so that we actually are reducing the sense that women are seeking out abortions. And as an example of that, one of the things that I've talked about is how do we provide the resources that allow women to make the choice to keep a child? You know, have we given them the health care that they need? Have we given them the support services that they need? Have we given them the options of adoption that are necessary? That, I think, can make a genuine difference.
Okay. There's a lot more I'd like to ask on that, but we got 15 other questions here. Define marriage.
I believe that marriage is the union between a man and a woman. Now, for me as a Christian, for me as a Christian, it's also a sacred union. You know, God's in the mix.
Would you support a constitutional amendment with that definition?
No, I would not.
Why not?
And because historically we have not defined marriage in our Constitution. It's been a matter of state law. That has been our tradition. Now, I mean, let's break it down. The reason that people think there needs to be a constitutional amendment, some people believe, is because of the concern that about same-sex marriage. I am not somebody who promotes same-sex marriage, but I do believe in civil unions. I do believe that we should not, that for gay partners to want to visit each other in a hospital, for the state to say, you know what, that's all right. I don't think in any way inhibits my core beliefs about what marriage are. I think my faith is strong enough and my marriage is strong enough that I can afford those civil rights to others, even if I have a different perspective or a different view.
Okay, how about this? What about stem cells? Now, we've had this scientific breakthrough of creating these pluripotent stem cells in adult cells. Do we still need federal funding for research? Would you still support that for embryo stem cell?
Well, keep in mind the way the stem cell legislation that was vetoed by the president was structured. What it said was you could only use embryos that were about to be discarded, that had been created as a consequence of attempts at in vitro fertilization. So there were very tightly circumscribed mechanisms that were permitted. I think that that is a legitimate moral approach to take. If we are going to discard those embryos, and we know that there's potential research that could lead to curing debilitating diseases, Alzheimer's, Lou Gehrig's disease, if that possibility presents itself, then I think that we should, in a careful way, go ahead and pursue that research. Now, if, in fact, adult stem cell lines are working just as well, then of course we should try to avoid any kind of moral arguments that may be in place. But I want to make a broader point, Pastor Rick, on an issue like stem cell research. I mean, it's not like people who are in favor of stem cell research are going around thinking to themselves, you know, boy, let's go destroy some embryos, right? I mean, that's not the perspective that I think people come to that issue on. I think what they say is we would not tolerate a situation in which, you know, we're encouraging human cloning or in some ways diminishing the sacredness of human life and what it means to be human, but that, you know, in narrow circumstances, you know, there is nothing inappropriate with us pursuing scientific research that could lead to cures, so long as you know, we're not designing embryos for that purpose.
Okay, we've got one last time. I've got a bunch more, but let me just ask you one about evil. Does evil exist? And if it does, do we ignore it? Do we negotiate with it? Do we contain it? Do we defeat it?
Evil does exist. I mean, I think we see evil all the time. We see evil in Darfur. We see evil, sadly, on the streets of our cities. We see evil in parents who viciously abuse their children. And I think it has to be confronted. It has to be confronted squarely. And one of the things that I strongly believe is that you know, we are not going to, as individuals, be able to erase evil from the world. That is God's task. But we can be soldiers in that process, and we can confront it when we see it. Now, the one thing that I think is very important is for us to have some humility in how we approach the issue of confronting evil, because you know, a lot of evil has been perpetrated based on the claim that we were trying to confront evil.
In the name of good.
In the name of good.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think, you know, one thing that's very important is having some humility in recognizing that you know, just because we think our intentions are good doesn't always mean that we're going to be doing good.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to some domestic issues. Don't give me your stump speech on these. Let's go through it.
All right. This is hard. I've been on the stump for a long time.
I know it is.
All right.
Okay. The courts. Let me ask it this way. Which existing Supreme Court justice would you not have nominated?
That's a good one. That's a good one. I would not have nominated Clarence Thomas. I don't think that I don't think that he was a strong enough jurist or legal thinker at the time for that elevation. Setting aside the fact that I profoundly disagree with his interpretations of a lot of the Constitution, I would not nominate Justice Scalia, although I don't think there's any doubt about his intellectual brilliance, because he and I just disagree. You know, he taught at the University of Chicago, as did I, in the law school.
How about John Roberts?